For 20 years, the Dutch millionaire Sander Van der Veen dedicated his life to caring for his paralyzed son, Lucas. A life of luxury and silence reigned in the family's remote mansion, where Sander kept a secret that would change everything. Until one day a doubt began to gnaw at his heart. Something didn't seem right. He would never have imagined the dark truth he was about to discover. Sander Van der Veen, a successful businessman, had built a technology empire in the Netherlands. His life was perfect until the tragic accident that left his son Lucas paralyzed from the neck down. Since then, Sander withdrew from business and dedicated himself fully to his son, hiring the best doctors, caregivers, and installing everything in his mansion that Lucas would need to live comfortably. Guilt and sadness consumed him daily. Over time, the house became a place of routine. Lucas, always silent, seemed apathetic. Sander, while watching him day after day, began to feel something different. There was something in that look, something he couldn't understand. The restlessness grew in his chest and he began to wonder, what is really happening to my son? Lucas, I need to know if everything is okay with you, Sander whispered with a mix of love and despair. Sander's restlessness began to take over his nights. He started watching his son more closely, noticing small details he had never perceived before. Sometimes Lucas's gaze seemed too distant, almost as if he were hiding something. The nurses and caregivers assured him that everything was fine, but Sander felt that something was out of place. One day he decided to take a drastic measure. He discreetly installed cameras in every room of the house. He mentioned nothing to the care team, nor to his wife, who frequently traveled for work. He needed answers to the suspicions that tormented him. While reviewing the recordings of several weeks, something caught his attention. In the dead of night, Lucas slightly moved the fingers of his left hand. It was an almost imperceptible movement, but for someone who was theoretically completely paralyzed, it didn't make sense. "Lucas, are you moving?" Sander murmured, astonished, as he replayed the video multiple times. He faced a dilemma. Should he confront the caregivers, the doctors, or should he confront his own son? With the disturbing discovery that Lucas moved his fingers during the night, Sander decided to act. That same night, he stealthily approached his son's room, determined to confront him. He opened the door slowly, his heart racing. There was Lucas, apparently asleep, motionless as always. Sander approached the bed, sat down beside it, and with a trembling voice whispered, "Lucas, I saw you. I know you move when you think no one is watching." The silence stretched on, and Sander began to doubt his own sanity. But then something unexpected happened. A tear rolled down Lucas's face. Sander froze. "Lucas, can you hear me?" And at that moment, Lucas did something he hadn't done in years. He opened his mouth and tried to speak, his voice weak and almost inaudible. "Dad," he whispered with difficulty. Sander stepped back, shocked, and tears began to roll down his own face. Everything he had believed for 2 decades was beginning to crumble. What was Lucas hiding from him? And more importantly, who had lied all these years? In the days that followed, Sander couldn't get the scene out of his head. He felt that something much bigger was being hidden, and he needed to uncover the truth. Determined, he hired new doctors to reassess Lucas's case, demanding deeper tests and detailed neurological analyses. Meanwhile, Lucas began to show small signs of improvement, moving his hand more and even trying to communicate with glances and slight movements. Sander started to question all the treatment his son had received for 20 years. Were the caregivers hiding information? Had the previous doctors been negligent? One day during an examination session, the new neurologist called Sander for a private conversation. "Mr. Van der Veen, I believe we need to have a serious talk about your son's condition. The tests indicate that Lucas is not completely paralyzed. In fact, he could have regained some of his movements years ago, but for some reason this was interrupted." Sander felt a chill run down his spine upon hearing those words. He realized that all the trust he had placed in the professionals caring for Lucas was being destroyed. Someone had deliberately prevented his son's progress. But why? And who was behind this? Full of doubts, Sander began to investigate the old medical team and the nurses, trying to understand what was happening under his own roof. Sander's investigation led him to even more disturbing revelations. Upon reviewing old medical records and speaking with former employees, he discovered that some of Lucas's most important treatments had been mysteriously stopped without his knowledge. Alarmed, he confronted the former head of the caregivers, a woman named Marieke who had worked at the mansion since the accident. "You lied to me, Marieke," Sander shouted, furious. "All these years you knew that Lucas could have improved. Why? What are you hiding from me?" Marieke hesitated, her eyes filled with guilt and fear. Finally, with a trembling voice, she said, "It wasn't my decision, Sander. Your wife Ingrid asked to stop the treatments. She didn't want Lucas to fully recover." The ground seemed to collapse beneath Sander's feet. Ingrid, his wife? Why would she do something so cruel? His mind filled with doubts and indignation. "Ingrid, how could she?" Sander murmured, incredulous, his eyes glazed over. Marieke, with tears in her eyes, explained that Ingrid feared that if Lucas recovered, Sander's focus would return to business, and she would lose control over the luxurious life she led, with trips and parties while Sander was consumed by guilt. At that moment, Sander realized that everything he had lived through in the last 20 years was wrapped in lies and manipulations. But he needed a final confirmation. "Lucas, did you know about all of this?" Sander asked, looking at his son. With effort, Lucas slightly nodded his head, his eyes full of sadness, confirming that even unable to speak or act, he had always known. The devastating revelation left Sander in a state of deep shock. He confronted Ingrid as soon as she returned from yet another one of her long trips. Without any preamble, he threw all the evidence on the table, the medical documents, the recordings, and Marieke's words. Ingrid initially denied everything, but faced with the undeniable proof, she broke down. I didn't want to lose you, Sander," Ingrid cried, trying to justify her actions. "When the accident happened, you completely changed. Your life revolved around Lucas, and I felt invisible, abandoned. I thought that if he never recovered, the two of us could keep living together like before." Sander, with tears in his eyes, couldn't believe that the woman with whom he had shared his life was capable of something so cold and calculating. He looked at Lucas, who watched everything with sad and tired eyes. All the love and devotion he had dedicated to his son had been twisted by lies. "You destroyed our family, Ingrid," Sander said, his voice filled with pain. "And worst of all, you destroyed Lucas's chances of having a better life. I cannot forgive that." With these words, Sander made a decision that would change their lives. He removed Ingrid from their lives forever, hired a new medical team to restart Lucas's treatment, and dedicated himself to repairing the damage that had been done. Lucas, even after years of suffering, was finally starting to show signs of improvement. The movements of his fingers intensified, and he began to utter short words with effort. There was still a long way to go, but now, without the secrets surrounding him, father and son had the chance to rebuild their lives. 2 years had passed since Sander discovered the truth about Ingrid. Lucas, with the proper treatment, had regained a significant part of his movements. Although he could never be as he was before, he could now move his arms and even communicate through advanced technology that Sander funded. Father and son were closer than ever. Sander had sold a large part of his company to dedicate himself entirely to Lucas's recovery. Together, they traveled the world in search of the best treatments and rehabilitation opportunities. The life that Lucas had never been able to live was now slowly opening up to him. On a sunny morning, while Sander pushed Lucas's wheelchair through a park in Amsterdam, His son, with his new electronic voice, said, "Dad, thank you for never giving up on me." Sander stopped, looked at his son and smiled, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm the one who should thank you, Lucas, for teaching me what really matters in life." Although they carried deep scars, the two had found a new form of happiness. What began as a dark mystery had turned into a journey of love and resilience. Now both moved forward, with an uncertain future, but with one certainty. Together they could overcome any obstacle.